It is a great pleasure to speak about Handel's masterpiece, The Messiah. It has endless performance practice issues, meaning how it was actually played given the notes that are there. And so I'm going to touch on each piece a little bit. And so we start with what's called symphony, the opening movement, which is actually called French overture. And this is a style invented by Jean-Baptiste Lully in the 1600s, and it has all kinds of expectations from the performer in regards to style. And some of the expectations are called overdotting. That means playing notes if they were dotted. Overdotted meaning it can also mean that quick notes are coordinated with other notes, for example. This is an actual example here. But it's written. But in the overdotting style, one moves the single dotted notes over to another dot, and we get. And in addition to that, the notes are all separated. There is no such thing as legato style in music as a permanent factor until Beethoven's time, and I would say the earliest date for that would be about 1800, as well as non-vibrato in string playing until about 1860. So when you put all that together, you get a very different style from what we call modern performances of this piece. So in overdotting, we have a whole series of instructions from the 1690s in French of how to play overtures and the fugues that follow. So here's the beginning of this piece as written. It's laughable, but there are actually performances that sound like that. And everything is wrong with what I just played. And here's what's wrong. The notes are overdotted so that it's at least this. At least that, and there still seems to be something missing at the beginning, especially for such a famous and well-attended piece. It seems as if there's something missing in the in-between beats. And what we need to realize is that Handel, 99% was the harpsichordist for this event and conducted for the harpsichord, just as Haydn did on his symphonies. He conducted from the harpsichord. So would Handel have played? Probably not. And what we think of in this particular practice is that the in-between beats were filled in. And how can we tell from the score if we go to measure 7? Oops, all of a sudden, da-dum, da-dum is present in the second violin and viola. And that gives us the clue, the final clue that we've been looking for as how to play this overture. And I think instead of, for example, the harpsichord would have done. That is probably the way that the opening is played. And just another thing about French trills in this particular style, unless they're slurred, they're not played that way. They're played this way. And then that leads to a fugue which is usually played double that speed. So if it's etc., and probably all separated and in a manner staccato. How do we know that? We have a quote from Handel, who was asking about slurs in string playing, and he said towards the end of his life, he never added slurs, or very rarely, except for appoggiaturas, and simply that music at this particular period just sounded better if it all was bowed separately with spaces in between. Brings us to another topic: how much space in between notes, and how do we know this? The space between notes, according to Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, a man named Johann Joseph Quantz, a man named Leopold Mozart, yes, it was Mozart's father, said that notes are played half their value, and I believe in several places Carl Philipp says even 1/4 their value. So what we call legato style, which is from the Romantic period, simply did not exist in this time, and that goes especially for organ music, which is invariably played in this legato manner. So besides that, ornamentation can be added ad libitum, and cadenzas, depending on where they fall, can also be added. So that is the style of the overture, and the only thing that's different in Handel's example is that there is no concluding section of any length that would fit the standard overture, which is slow and dotted, a fugue, and then slow and dotted. We have 4 bars slow and dotted at the end. And to confuse things even more, we have another French direction that tells us when we shouldn't overdot. And it appears that approaching a cadence that the overdotting stops or slows down. And so that instead we have, let me play the bar before this starts. Okay, so at this tempo, 2, 3. And that would be a true French overture. The next movement is, of course, famous Come Fort Ye, and all you have to know are the Italian terms. Largo does not mean just slow-ish. It also means that the accents in the bar are on every beat. So instead of playing, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, that you play every beat strong. So in this particular case, because the tempo is larghetto and piano, it means that you want to hear and that's all you have to know there until you arrive at the ad libitum, which means, of course, a cadenza. So that's at measure 5, 6, 7, 8, and the tenor goes, and I would suggest the following. And I borrowed Beethoven's cadenza from one of his cello sonatas. It fits perfectly there, and it's actually in the same key. And he thought that Handel was the greatest composer that ever lived. So he may have quoted something from this. And it's interesting that it should work so well in the same key. And that's the only thing you have to know here, except until you get to measure 30. And although it doesn't say anything, there's a lot of things I think that are omitted. And at this place, the tempo gets faster. So that from the bar before, becomes more like a recitative style, and you simply sing it that way. And the question is, do you add other notes? And this is a famous problem in all of Handel, and really all of Bach, is in recitatives, are there appoggiaturas added? And it has become traditional, one of the few things from this period that has become traditional, for example, at the end. It goes, for God, and you do instead as an appoggiatura at the end. Why didn't he write it in? I have no idea. But so much was not written in at this particular period that the question is, what is stylistically correct? And that is stylistically correct. Next movement, andante. Again, the Italian term. What does it mean? Andare means just to go, and it has come down through the sources to mean that all the eighth notes in the bass are played equally. And here's what we've got. Now, Normally you would play them this way in 4/4 time. The second and fourth beats would be weak. But instead we get so all the beats 1, 2, 3, 4 are emphasized. And that is the difference between not having andante and having andante. And as far as that is concerned in the string parts, it simply means that the strings are also accented as they are with the trills. There's no way you can really avoid them. That takes care of that movement. Let's see if there's anything special. No? Okay. Next movement says allegro. Allegro truly means just about tempo. It is usually described as the first of the faster tempos after what is called ordinary tempo, or tempo ordinario. So the tempo words that go up after ordinary tempo would be allegro, then vivace, then presto. Those are the standard terms and in order of acceleration. If you take Kvantz, you will find that what his ordinary tempo is, as he says, the pulse of a healthy man after a meal, is about 72 to the quarter note. Not very fast, not very slow. So your guess is as good as mine about what allegro is. And the only other question that you would have in this wonderful chorus is, do you have to overdub? Now, it's easy instrumentally to overdub, and there's no instruments playing. So what about voices? And the answer, you have to ask two questions. Are there syllables with the quick notes? And if there are, then they are not overdotted because of the problem with the words. If there are not, you can try it and see if it sounds better to you. So in this case, and the glory, it's hard to get glory, so probably it is not overdotted. Etc. There's no big stopping point. Notice how simply this piece is scored. It shows you also that Handel wasn't thinking, well, this is a very special piece to me. Even though there's a story about how the angels came to him and told him all the notes, he wrote it in like 3 weeks, which is a complete miracle. But the question is, does it have some special treatment that we don't know about? It is scored simply for his standard scoring, 3 strings and cello and bass, and oboes and 2 trumpets. Bach would always score for 3 trumpets, and timpani, of course. So when we get to the end of this particular movement, we have a pause, and then we have a plagal cadence. So Handel as a harpsichord is probably like the overture would have done. And it also makes it much easier to come in. Everybody who conducts this knows that these big silences are dangerous because the next entrance, no one will be together. But if the harpsichord does it, you can't miss. And then the soprano can also have a good moment, if she's got it in her voice, to sing some high notes. So I would suggest, hath spoken it. Very simple ending. It gives that brilliance that you would like to have. Very often the high notes at the end of pieces are omitted because the composer wasn't sure whether anybody could sing them. Going on to the next movement gives us our next big problem, the issue with this figure. This figure, and is proven through all these source materials and many examples in the actual music, is always played as an upbeat, as an overdotted note. So instead of, it is unquestionably played, then the bass comes in. And that is, throughout this whole texture, you will see, and it's really, So remember that the figure 8th note followed by 16th that has a dot, followed by a 16th, that the opening 8th note is unquestionably played as an overdot. And I will demonstrate in a minute about triplets and how they work with this same idea. So that takes care of this. Next one, again, has the tempo larghetto. Larghetto, again, means that all the beats are emphasized. So here's the tempo. So that means that instead of playing this way, that you emphasize all the larger note beats, so it'll be accent, 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 each one, accent. So all the important beats are accented in the bar, and when you get to the end of this texture, it says prestissimo, not a very common marking that you see in Handel. So the question is, how do you convey this to an orchestra? So it's either going to be twice as fast, let's try that. That's probably what it is. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Just literally twice as fast. And that takes care of all of the tempo problems in this piece. It's really fast for the strings and rather exciting, I think. And then when it goes back to larghetto, we do dee-dum, bim-bum. Then we get another presto, again double the tempo, and we get an adagio. And here we go, a cadenza. What are we going to do? This is measure 148. Da, 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 da. Okay, so here's the simplest one. Let's do simple to very complicated. Pause, trill. Now when we say trill, what do we mean for singers? There's two types of trill, and it's confusing because there's a term trillo and tremolo in very early Italian music. And the trillo means repeat the notes like ha 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 ha, ha like that. And tremolo means trill like that. So it depends whether we're talking Italian or something else. But the question is, again, here's the cadenza, and I did the simplest. And if you want, you can do that as a complicated, more complicated cadenza. And then when you get to the trillo section, you can go what is called a repeated note trill like this. That is termed a goat's trill. I don't know whether goats actually trill that way. I've never talked to one. But I think the way that you can figure it is that it became part of standard literature in the 1600s, very early 1600s, and it was called a ribattute. It's a repeated note, and it sounds like this. So you repeat ha, 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 then you go into as fast as you can sing the repeated notes, and that brings up another theory, which is how fast can you sing repeated notes? And we go to this unusual theory that we call the chuckle technique, which is that your fast notes will go as fast as your chuckle. And in my experience with famous singers, I'll name Kathleen Battle, a very imposing, great singer, that her chuckle was the same as her fast notes. And you can always tell when that's going to be if you get them to laugh first, and then if you hear them sing something. So I can't sing at all, so this is ridiculous, but if I go, ah, that's about, ah, it's usually for most people around 126. That's usually the speed of the chuckle. So depending on how you laugh, so shall you also sing. Next one, allegro, is simply you pick the tempo. Now, in this case, the quick notes are not chuckled because they're too slow. So in this case, the sopranos sing in the style that Font says is a gentle expulsion from the chest. That means that instead of as fast as you can ha 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 like that it's ha 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 ha, everything has a ha on it. And that's the difference between more ancient singing and opera. That as opera became modernized, that filling big halls was more important, and then the nature of singing, especially for sopranos, became to fill the hall, and what happened was that that style of singing was too soft. And so it became what the style is that we know today of larger vibrato, larger sound, and less fluency. Now, less fluency sounds like a defect, but it is incorporated by the Romantic opera composers to fit just that idea. I'm, of course, thinking of Verdi and Puccini. So the idea of tremolo also comes into focus here because as string technique evolved, it became so that notes that were not tremoloed became more and more tremoloed until all notes became subject to tremolo, but not the very fast notes, of course. And this, I would say, is given in history books as around 1860 with Joachim, the great violinist, and it's quoted in his quartet. He formed a quartet. So in this particular case, this figure is not as fast as possible. It's only allegro. And so we are about to see a piece that where it has to be a chuckle technique. So that's this style of piece. And besides being a magnificent work, it is not usual to have any problems, and there are no problems associated with this particular movement. As I say, we're coming up against one that will have a lot of problems. Next, Recitative is now, it has already written in this particular version of the score that the chords are arpeggiated, written out. Okay, that's your simplest possible version. It can be, for example, Behold is very dramatic, so the harpsichordist could start, Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son. That could be the harpsichord intro, or it could even be da dee da 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 dee da 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 da. And here we go. With us, probably with not an appoggiatura, but taking the previous note and repeating it. With us. Then the harpsichord plays that. Next movement. Okay, andante, again it's marked. 6/8 normally would be about this speed. That would be your normal 6/8 speed and tempo, but instead he says andante, and that means that it's a little slower and that all the eighth notes in the bass have emphasis. Not this way as it would be without that Italian word. Rather it's. Now, and here we have the contrast. And that takes care of that movement. There's nothing special except before the choir comes in, there is a very awkward place for the alto, either male or female alto. If it's a female alto, this low note here, this is measure 102, is very low, and then this is almost inaudible. So what do you do there? The strings have So they're helping. I would suggest the following. And then is a little appoggiatura up to trill. And when I say a little appoggiatura, I mean this figure. It's called a Schleifer. And the harpsichord should go so that the choir can hear it and come in. We know that Handel's first performance in Dublin had a choir of about 30 voices. So you figure that that will be the optimum size for this piece, unless you're in a vast situation like in St. Peter's in Rome. So you should be able to hear the harpsichord, is what I'm saying. Next movement, accompagnato, has two markings, andante and larghetto. Okay, the andante means that the eighth notes are not unaccented. And the larghetto means that all the beats are prominent. And you can't help but play it that way because that's how it's slurred in the original. So that's, this texture means larghetto, and this texture in the bass is the texture of andante. So those two are put together in this wonderful piece. Next movement, larghetto, again is because all the beats are accented. So, and it's marked, so you can't help but play it that way. So, da, 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 da. And it's sung that way. And the bass should do a goat's trill, da, 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 ha, 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 or, please excuse my singing, I can't sing at all, but it can also be ha, 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 and that is the whole movement, and that brings us to a very problematic movement. And remember that 4 of these pieces, it's either 4 of these pieces or 5 of these pieces, you have to check and see which it is, are taken from his Italian duets, which I believe were written a little bit earlier than this piece, but not by a year, less than that. And so in a fit of compositional need, he borrowed some music, which he's done his entire life, from himself or from others. I do it myself. I think it's perfectly valid. Bach did it often. The Mass in B minor has 7 pre-existing movements, and this has 4 or 5 pre-existing movements. So here's the problem. This is the famous run that nobody can sing. And this is the famous, here it goes. Okay, now that's at measure 14, 15, 16, and 17. There's no place for a breath. So does that indicate that the tempo is slow or fast? The tempo is very fast. And how do we know it? Because you can't sing it in one breath unless it's very fast. And this is the only piece in this great work, in my opinion, that qualifies for chuckle technique. That you simply sing it at the speed of your quick notes as your chuckle. Ha, I can't sing. Ha, 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 ha. And believe me, when the sopranos hit that F sharp and they do it in one breath, they need coffee. It's completely exhausting. But that's the only way it will work, and that's why I'm sure that the tempo of this piece is very fast. Etc. And so the marking is andante allegro. So he says allegro is the speed. Andante means that the bass is not played this way, but it's played. And the harpsichord should play. the notes have chords. Okay, the fifa is self-explanatory. The only question for you is whether you overdot. So it's do you do, and do you do, or do you do as written? 1, 2. My answer to that would be depending on the players. If they can overdot, which is often the case as far as the question, can they overdot in that way together? If they can, you should do it because they're very hard to find people that can do that. So I would suggest 1, 2, 3 here, overdot. And that takes care of that. No, nothing with the recitative. Okay, now the two accompagnatos. First one is andante. That is the walking tempo. And the next one, number 14, is allegro. So instead of, it would. About that speed. So that's the difference between andante and allegro. Both pieces are entitled the same thing. That continues the same tempo into this movement. It's allegro, so that's that quick tempo, not quite chuckle. And just so you know this about string playing, if you have 4 notes that are the same with dots, and below the dots is a slur, that means that it's bowed in the same direction, all 4 notes, but that you stop a little bit in between each one. So it goes da, It's like the sound of an organ. Okay, glory to God. Okay, rejoice. This, of course, as people who are scholars know, has an alternate in triplets. And why does that exist? Well, probably for the most practical of practical reasons, that the soprano said, I can't sing this, it's too fast, it's too whatever. So he made another version that is easier to sing because it's in triplets, but the original version is the one that you usually hear. Again, the question is, do you sing this in chuckle technique speed or not? That is not fast enough for chuckle, and I don't know whether I've heard anybody sing it at this speed. But it would be possible to sing it in that way. And other than that, oh yes, a place where it slows down always. Let me see if I can find it. And then people usually sing. There's no indication to show that. That doesn't mean that it wasn't done. And that in the spur of the moment, Handel might have said, we'll sing this a little slower. I would say that that's a personal decision. The next important movement is the duet, soprano and alto, in 12/8, larghetto e piano. So that, again, gives us this feeling of accenting most of the beats. I think one of the reasons he may have done this is that these pieces were often heard in very big buildings, and that when the inner beats are not accented, they may have disappeared in the acoustic. So that's why accent. Probably add a trill. And of course the words help. So that would be opposed to this. And I'm exaggerating a little bit. And that gives Handel's suggestion with those 2 Italian words. And then the most difficult to figure out piece is the next one, the end of part 1. And in this piece, this is taken from one of the Italian arias. And the famous dot in measure 2 drives everybody nuts. What does it mean? In French music, which Handel was very familiar with, the single dot in an otherwise undotted texture means that you're going to dot the notes for a bit. And how long does that take? Who knows? In Handel's Suite in D minor for harpsichord, the fugue in that movement has one dotted note at the beginning. And I play the whole piece dotted on my recordings and performances. So the question is he telling us something similar? So here's your options, I think. You can sort of ignore it. It's very hard to sing, to make it anyway the pitch sound right, although you don't have a separate syllable. That's the other clue. Is there a syllable? Is there not a syllable? So I think that what he meant, that this is sung as written, and that you start this. So just those few notes are dotted, and even these can be dotted. And that changes the tempo totally, as it was more modern to play all of Baroque music faster, which is from 1960 on, really. I think that in this case, that this is more like a movement of a pop dance. Even. Totally different feeling from a piece which is usually played much quicker. Usually, in my opinion, all Baroque music was played much too slowly, but there are some pieces which should be slower than normally played. That's to add to the confusion, and I think this is one of them. And other than that, dotted notes with trills. This is measure 11. So again, on a keyboard, it's easy, but for voices, it's not easy. And it often sounds awful, because singers, with very few exceptions, can actually do something like that. So I suggest almost always that it's a 3-note go trill. It sounds ha 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 like that. And in the bass place here, you could do this, tenor. And then later on the bass, you could do you could do now. Why would you do that in the bass? Because the alto has the same rhythm almost. Here's the alto. I think that this was a shorthand that got out of hand, and that what Handel actually meant was that then even after that. It sounds very interesting. It's singable, and there's no syllables added. So that's your clue. Is it singable because there are no more syllables and it's not too high? Part 2. Again, enormous problem. The opening chorus, usually sung, in my opinion, twice too slow. It is filled with overdotting problems, and the opening note, again, is the typical 8th note followed by, so that most likely the whole piece is all dotted. Everything is dotted that has any dots and doesn't have any dots, so that you play, in fact, and with the other parts, and a largo texture means all the beats are accented. It's probably the alto starts, "Behold the Lamb of God." It's also an incredibly impossible note for the alto to sing. Behold, never works, never. So what do people do? You can either, if you have a countertenor singing it, which is what would have happened, it's singable. If you don't have the altos, just sing the opening G up an octave. Behold the Lamb, and it'll be heard at least, and people will argue with it, but it's a practical answer. So, behold the Lamb. And largo means that, not the way I'm playing it, I was playing it normally without the largo. I was playing one less, or less. So it would rather be da, dee, da, da. And then it has a wonderful martial grand quality as opposed to this. It doesn't sound like you're holding the Lamb of God. Okay, largo, air, same problem. You just simply accent all the beats. So, on, da, that solves the whole piece. There's no more problem if you just do that. No place for a cadenza that I see. Okay, the middle section has to have some tempo relationship because people will know what they're doing. So, dum, di, da, dum, 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 either dum, da, dum, and I would suggest that the singer also overdot. So if the orchestra is going bum ba-dum ba-dum bum dum da da, the singer should go dee da 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 da. It's lowish. I understand that if it's a guy, it's possible. If it's a woman singing, it may not be possible. Now the ending of it, from shame and spitting. You could do this suggested in the score. Shame and spitting. That's fine. You could even do from shame and spitting. It's more dramatic and all. It sounds like spitting, so which is what it's trying to do. And the orchestra should trill, not just. It should have the answer. You realize I'm playing this on a piano. This is not a harpsichord. I apologize. It should be a harpsichord. They're hard to keep in tune. A piano is much easier. Next chorus. Again, same problem with overdotting. No matter how it's written, it's all. Largo e staccato. That means all the beats are accented. Etc. Again, a very dramatic chorus that is, he already writes the overdotting, so not much you have to worry about. Next chorus. Problem is, what do you do with the words? Because it sounds like it should be marcato. So after puzzling over this many years, I've decided that the best way of singing it is, and with his stripes. So you don't go, and with his stripes, but and with his stripes, break, we are healed. Everything is this way, marcato. And by the way, Bach borrowed this theme. Mozart is. That's Mozart's example. So this is one of the archetypes of themes that incorporate diminished seventh chords. So let's see if there's anything special. I don't see anything special. Oh, and are we like sheep? He must have laughed when he wrote this piece. The tendency is for the chorus to giggle and to go, like the sound of sheep. It says allegro moderato. Okay, so that means not this. Because the runs are going to be impossible, so probably, like most sheep, a little gentle. And then the runs which come in later, can be sung pretty successfully, not as a chuckle, but just and pretty much sings itself if you can sing. Accompagnado is the next movement. Again, you look for the texture with the voice, and they that see him. That can be also that see him. It sounds better actually with the appoggiatura, and it says larghetto. That means that instead of playing this way, that you play. So all the beats are accented. Da, 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 da. That's the tendency for this texture. This wonderful fugue. He trusted in God. It needs one trill. So after you finish, and again, singers don't do this ha. It's not natural for the voice. So I always suggest light for him. It sounds fine. It gives the goat feeling. The trill is like a goat's trill. And you always know when that's coming because it's the end of the subject. Here again. And they're all separated. Next, accompagnado says largo. That's just reminding you to not get off the second and fourth beats. Okay, Arioso, a gorgeous piece for tenor. Now, when you have these huge jumps, behold, usually you change tessituras as you're singing that. So it might be easier to sing, behold. And largo means that all the beats are accented. I've added another appoggiatura. Accent, trill. Probably, this may be a better long trill. I guess that's singable. Next important piece, the air. Larghetto andante. So that means that the bass. So it's already, the dots are written out for you. You have to put in a few trills. I would suggest appoggiatura. Trill. It's written out for you. Slurred trills played before the beat usually, so not, but how do we know that? There's only one source, and that's French composer Jean-Philippe Rameau in his introduction to his keyboard pieces has an example where the slurred trill is realized before the beat. It's just an option which I think works very well, like in the Goldberg variations. I play it after the beat, but it's not with the beat. You could also play, depending on your feeling of the day. Next movement, tempo ordinario. Here again is your Kwanzaa's so-called 72. Lift up. And then ye everlasting, it probably is overdotted, so it's probably be, not. So, it's probably the tempo. And there are lots of overdotting problems in this piece. When there are upbeats that go, it's probably, it's easy to fix. just add a flag and a dot. Allegro, let all the angels of God. I think it plays itself pretty much. I don't think there's anything. The question, I guess, that you could ask is, are you saying all the words separately? Let all the angels of God worship him. So probably you just do it according to the word. Separate, slur, gels separate, slur, gives you a lovely sound. Separate, slurred, slurred. Okay, this is not often sung in so-called complete performances. An alto aria, it's a difficult piece to figure out, but it says larghetto, so that would mean and probably the alto sings. It's probably more martial. The question is, do you do it all the way through? And Handel does mark it sometimes. This is the crazy, annoying thing produced by his music, is that he doesn't necessarily mark it all the way through. From 22 on, we have it written 23. So there's one bar that's not written out, and undoubtedly it's an oversight or an undersight. And I think that it could be that the whole piece is actually dotted, that it's not here, not here, here, alto, da. Maybe it depends on the skill of the singer. Some singers cannot sing that way, but those that can, it's always a smaller voice and uses less vibrato. That's another thing that happened with vocal technique, that as string technique added vibrato around 1860, vocal technique also added vibrato, I would say closer to 1820. Because around that period is when you stop seeing choral masterpieces filled with running passages. For example, in the Brahms Requiem, there's if any, there's none. In the Mozart Requiem, it's still there, absolutely, and of course in Bach, it's loaded with runs. In the Missa Solemnis, there's not much runny stuff except at the end of the Gloria. And I don't think any of it is at what we call the chuckle technique. It's not as fast as you can sing. So I would say that not only was vibrato added, but tempo was slowed down, and singers sang music that didn't have athletic runs in it. And even in romantic opera, there's very little athletic run-sounding stuff, for example, in Verdi. There's not much. And you can be sure it would have been tailoring to a specific soprano or a specific tenor. This movement, the Lord gave the word. Okay, this says andante allegro. And this could not be more andante because all the beats are emphasized. So the was not this way. But this way. And I would think even the eighth notes are accented because it's such a powerful chorus that you think ha 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 ha, that everything has this kind of quality. Next one, Arioso, andante larghetto, same problem as before, and the same words describe it, that it's all accented as far as the beat. No problems, just not too slow, and all the beats are accented. The air coming up, larghetto, so that means that the beats again are accented. This is what my theory is, that the buildings took away those unaccented beats, and he didn't like that. Now, in this case, the violins simply double each other. So you're better off having just one violin play it. And it needs a lot of ornamentation. Trill there. Schleifer, trill. So this needs a lot of ornamentation in addition. And it's a gentle piece. So the alto can do, because it's slow. I think that's singable. So know when to stop. For example, them, pause, in other words, breathe, etc. Oh, this is a good example. Their sound has gone out. It starts, Now, why does everybody else go, their sound is gone out? Tenors, their sound is gone. Basses, let the sopranos go. It's the same problem with that same figure, that the first note of the beginning of a piece that is part of a dotted pattern is written not with a dot, because the composer would have written eighth note with a dot, and somehow they thought that looked odd. Or maybe the overdottor was asleep. So you change the opening, of course. The sound is... Why do the nations so furiously rage together? Obviously, a brilliant piece as this says allegro. I would think it's totally based on the speed that the bass can or wants to sing it. Probably can is the better word. And it is simply martial, and the string playings are simply alternating. It couldn't be anything easier except to notice in, for example, bar 12, that the pairs are slurred. And of course, there's always a trill at the end. About that speed. And other than that, it just roars through. I don't think there's anything much that you have to say about it. I'm looking for a cadenza place. I think you could at 66 go da 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 bum, ba, like that. I wish I could sing. And then on to the next chorus. Let them break the bonds asunder, a very difficult piece. The trick for this is to lead in from the previous little intro. It goes, so just to count 3, 4, let them break them, right into it. So otherwise people go, that reaction, right into it. Wonderfully descriptive piece, and I think probably a chuckle tempo. These, so I would think it's around somewhere between 120 and 126, because you can't help but sing all of these dramatic things. And these were probably used as exercises. So like, people practice the runs that way. And the same with the next the big famous tenor piece. Nothing special. I think it just continues with the same tempo that you had before in the previous piece. And then famous Hallelujah chorus. So I would say that the opening is a little bit moderate. Hallelujah, 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 etc. And then we get to the, let's find it. So that every time you sing hallelujah, you sing it a little jaunty. Hallelujah, hallelujah. And it has a more, gracious feeling. And then we go to the slower. Okay, now what do you do with this long note? World is the word. Probably you carry it into the next downbeat. Da, da, dee, da, 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 carry it with a crescendo. Stop. Carry it through. And then this, I think you can pick up a little bit. And the goat's trill here, ha, 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 every time it happens. And I think the words are all separated. So, and he shall reign forever. And when I say separated, I don't mean, and he shall. I mean, and he shall reign for, like 3/4 of the value. That would be what I think is the norm for this piece. Anytime there's those cadence things, add a goat's trill in 45 tenor. I can't do a goat's trill on the piano. And then alto. Ha, ha, ha. It sounds so much better on the voice. End of part 2, part 3. Larghetto. Okay, all the beats are accented, and it's just a trill problem. So there is no tempo, but 3/4 is not a slow tempo. It's always described moderate to fast. So this needs a lot of ornamentation. So it would be typical of him. Now not here, more gentle, more gentle. Now when you have these fast trills, the note, so-called upper note trill, we haven't talked about that. Upper note trills in the so-called reform movement in the 60s, people were saying, oh, you're doing this all wrong, all the trills are from the upper note. But sometimes the composer writes in the upper note before the trill, so it's already done. But it's a before the beat trill, and that's what this is. This is, you don't do it. It's almost impossible on the piano. It's written already. And if you want, and here, I think you are free to start on the main tone if the previous note is the upper note. That's the rule I follow. It's a very long and big piece, and I speed up parts of it. Okay. Right here. It's faster tempo. The worms destroy. Be sure that it's in hemiola. Hemiola at the end of 3/4 bars is extremely common and extremely wishing to be heard. So 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, and again, for now is Christ risen. I would do an octave lower. Remember, Handel was not, as his first language, speaking English. So he may not have sensed about English that risen is easier to go, risen from the dead. Okay, and then here it is. For now is Christ risen. Pause. approaching a cadenza, I would wait. It says adagio. I would do at least that, or, and then a trill. And if you feel uncomfortable, a ribattute, Since my man came death, double tempo from the grave to the allegro. So. Okay, nothing to that. By the way, the long notes in the arias come from source materials to be played not at all their full length, so that even if it's written as a whole note, da-dum, da-da-da-da, let's say these are all whole notes, most likely there are da-dum, 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 da-dum. They're broken up. Okay, that follows then with the famous trumpet piece, A Nightmare for Overdotting. You can, of course, ignore it altogether and just play it as written, if you want. But it's very annoying because it's a mixture of dotted notes against not dotted notes. And it looks like someone forgot to wake up the dotter, the D-O-T-T-E-R, to add all of these dots. So I tend to think that for the most part, it's all dotted. And that it's, for example, the opening. This is certainly, I do the whole thing. Now in French style, as I approach the cadence, I get out of the dotting. Even. And with further complexity, if you want to even get more complicated, French tradition, when you do not do the standard overdotting, add dots and then turn the next note into the 16th. If there are dots on the note already, I know this is hard to understand, dots on the notes mean that they are, in fact, not overdotted. The dots on top of the notes mean not overdotted. And if, this is a French rule, if the note that you're dotting, da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-dum, is a dissonance with the bass, this is also complicated, that instead of da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-dum, you get da-da-da-da-da-da, which is called in barroom circles a Scotch snap. In more elevated terminology, like at Harvard, we called it a Lombard rhythm. So I would say a trumpet, at least you're safe. Dum da dum ba dum ba dum ha 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 ha. Now we're approaching the cadence. Not there. So you have to mark it in the parts. There's no way that people are going to just intuit this. You have to decide when you're approaching the cadence. And we have lots of examples from Couperin that show this, but this is not a widely held theory. People dispute it. So just remember that. It's a disputed theory, but I think this whole piece is all in dotted notes, sometimes Scotch snaps, and at the cadence approach that it becomes not that. And in the B section, he gets rid of the dotted stuff altogether. People usually leave this out. So there again would be a goat's trill. So the harpsichord has to do something. You can't just play this. There are no figures, so it's so not often heard that I don't even recognize it. But it gives you a relief from the dotted notes. Okay, and this wonderful aria, O Death, whereas I string, all you have to know is the bass notes are all equal. Nothing special, except the chorus then comes in at the same tempo. Make sure that those are broken. But thanks. Wonderful piece. Filled with so many wonderful pieces. Again, larghetto. So it means that. This one is, the larghetto applies to his slurrings that all the beats of 3/4 bar are accented. Usually beats 2 and 3 are not accented. Often beats 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 are accented towards the end, approaching a cadence. That's in hemiola. And in this case, that means that he, 1, accent, accent, accent. So it's, again, a martial piece. And then comes the grand. Oh, worthy is the Lamb. Okay. So the curious thing is that even though when it occurs in A major, timpani comes in with it at the beginning, there's no timpani written. So obviously, whoever had the timpani part lost the last page. It ended up in the river someplace. Because it's missing the opening of this magnificent, one of the 5 greatest choruses ever written. Should be at the beginning. That was slain, or that was slain. Probably that's a little better. That separate, carry it through because of the S, was slain. Now, if you have enough gumption, you can do, and hath redeemed us to God. Now, what do you do after that? Because this says andante. I think that the tempo doesn't really change and that the beginning is usually played too slowly. When he says largo, he means all the beats are accent. So when you get here, you're still. And here the timpani comes in. Should come in. Why isn't it coming in the score? Must be another score. I have a score with timpani written in. Obviously, you had timpani here. As I say, it fell into the river. I don't know what happened to the part. But to think that those things didn't happen all the time in life at this time, you're an idealist. It was always almost a nightmare to be alive during this period. Now, the Amen. I do the following. I add these extra notes, 2 of them in the theme. I add here. Here's a trill on the C sharp. It can be just like that. And this wonderful place where all this tremendous sound is reduced down to just strings playing for a little while. It's like a joke of some sort. Okay. And in this score it says it could also be played on the harpsichord. It always sounds odd, just the strings playing it. You think, what happened? Wasn't there more going on? Somebody forgot the pages or something. Okay, so at the very end, I add dotted notes towards the end. I can guarantee you, when you pass on, ask Handel if he dotted these notes. He has to have. So let's go from, I'll play here. sounds so regal and grand, and it's very typical of his style. And I add here, Amen. The trumpet does, Amen. And then, of course, the soprano. So give the ladies that can sing it their favorite high A. So the piece ends on a D major chord with, of course, an F sharp on top. You know, obviously one of the five greatest pieces in the world is this piece. So give it all you've got. Just realize what performance practice is in addition to what is there in the text. It's been 250 years of not realizing that. And in 1960s, things started to change. And, you know, like ultra-conservative people, there are those that detest this, adding anything to scores. But it was done, and it was part of the practice, and the music is unfulfilled without it. So it's been my pleasure to present my ideas, and I hope some of them find some place in your heart. Thank you.